Viktor Frankl was born on March 26, 1905, in a modest Jewish family in Vienna. His father, Gabriel, ran a small textile shop, and his mother, Elsa, cared for the home and the children. From a young age, Viktor felt the steady rhythm of a household that valued hard work and learning. He was the second of 3 children, and the family's modest means meant that every book, every school supply, was a small treasure. The city of Vienna was alive with music, art, and ideas, and the Frankl children often walked past the great opera house on their way to school. Those streets would later become a backdrop for Viktor's early thoughts about meaning and purpose. In school, Viktor was a quiet student who liked to read. He remembered a moment in 4th grade when a teacher asked the class to write a short essay about what they wanted to be when they grew up. The other children shouted about becoming doctors, engineers, or famous singers. Viktor felt a knot of pressure in his chest. He wanted to please his parents, but he also felt a strange pull toward something deeper, something he could not yet name. This feeling of pressure at school is a small echo of the way many young students today feel the weight of expectations from teachers and parents. The pressure can make a child wonder whether success is measured by grades alone or by a sense of purpose that goes beyond numbers. A few years later, as a teenager, Viktor discovered a love for playing the violin. He spent hours in a small room practicing scales, feeling the vibrations of the strings under his fingers. The music gave him a sense of direction that schoolwork did not. He often thought, "Why do I keep coming back to this instrument?" The answer was not a career plan, but a feeling that the music helped him answer a quiet question inside. This search for purpose in a hobby mirrors the experience of many teens today who turn to sports, art, or video games to find a place where they feel alive. The hobby becomes a small compass that points towards something larger than the daily routine. Viktor's formal education began at the University of Vienna, where he enrolled in medicine in 1923. At that time, Vienna was a hub of scientific and philosophical activity. The city's cafes were filled with discussions about psychology, philosophy, and the new ideas of Freud and Adler. In those cafes, Viktor listened to debates about the nature of the human mind. He was especially drawn to the work of Alfred Adler, who emphasized the importance of striving for significance. Adler's ideas about social interest, the feeling that one belongs to a larger community, left a mark on the young student. One historical anecdote from this period tells of a rainy afternoon in 1919, when a 15-year-old Viktor sat in a small coffee house near the university. A professor of philosophy, Karl Jaspers, was giving an informal talk about existentialism, a term that was just beginning to appear in German thought. Jaspers spoke about the idea that each person must create their own meaning in a world that does not give it for free. Viktor was fascinated. He later wrote, "The first time I heard the word existential, I felt a sudden opening, as if a door inside me had been unlocked." This early encounter with existential ideas planted a seed that would later grow into his own theory of meaning. Another anecdote from Vienna before the First World War shows Viktor's curiosity about the human spirit. In 1915, when he was 10, his family attended a public lecture by the famous neurologist Sigmund Freud. Freud spoke about the unconscious mind and how hidden wishes shape our actions. Viktor was struck by the idea that people are often driven by forces they cannot see. He later recalled, "I left the hall with a feeling that there was a hidden river beneath the surface of every life." This impression stayed with him through his studies and later work. During his university years, Viktor met a group of students who called themselves the Vienna Circle. They were interested in logical analysis and scientific rigor. While the circle focused on language and logic, Viktor felt that something essential was missing: the question of why a person chooses to act in a certain way. He began to write notes in his notebook, asking, "What gives a life worth living?" These notes would later become the foundation of his own therapeutic approach. The early influences on Viktor's thinking were not limited to academic ideas. His family's experience during the war years also shaped his view of human resilience. When World War I broke out, the Frankl shop was forced to close, and the family struggled to find enough food. Viktor saw his mother share a small piece of bread with a neighbor who had none. He later said, "In that moment I learned that meaning can be found in the act of giving, even when there is little left for oneself." This observation of compassion in hardship would later appear in his writings about the human capacity to find purpose through love and service. Viktor's education continued at the University of Vienna's medical school, where he studied psychiatry under the guidance of Paul Schilder, a noted neurologist. Schilder taught that the mind and body are closely linked, and that mental illness often has a physical component. Viktor absorbed this lesson, but he also felt that the mind needed more than just biology to explain why people suffer. He began to ask, if two people face the same loss, why does one crumble while the other finds a new path? This question would later lead him to develop the idea that meaning is the key factor. In 1926, Viktor completed his medical degree and began working at the Vienna Psychiatric Clinic. There he encountered patients with severe depression, anxiety, and psychosis. One patient, a young woman named Anna, could not find any reason to get out of bed after the death of her father. Viktor tried the common treatments of the time: medication, hypnosis, and talk therapy. While Anna's symptoms eased a little, she still felt empty. Viktor asked her, "What mattered to you before your father died?" She answered, "I loved to paint." Viktor encouraged her to return to painting, even if only for a few minutes each day. Over weeks, Anna's mood improved, and she began to talk about new ideas for her art. Viktor noted that when a person connects with a valued activity, the sense of purpose can lift the spirit. This early clinical observation would become a cornerstone of his later theory. The path from these early experiences to the development of logotherapy, the therapy that focuses on meaning, was not a straight line. Some scholars argue that a philosopher's early life has little impact on their later ideas. They claim that great thinkers are shaped more by the intellectual climate of their era than by personal history. In this view, Viktor's childhood in Vienna would be a footnote, not a cause. Yet, the details of his upbringing, the pressure he felt at school, the solace he found in music, and the compassion he witnessed during wartime, all appear repeatedly in his own writings. He himself wrote, "My own life is the proof that meaning can be found even in the most terrible circumstances." This statement suggests that his personal story is intertwined with his philosophical outlook. Another counterargument says that a philosopher's background is irrelevant to the value of their ideas. According to this view, the truth of a theory should stand on its own, independent of who created it. If one follows this line, Viktor's early years would be dismissed as biographical trivia. However, many readers find his ideas more vivid because they see how his life experiences illustrate the concepts. When a therapist tells a patient, "You can choose your attitude even in suffering," the words feel more powerful when the therapist has lived through suffering. Viktor's own survival of the Holocaust gives his message a weight that abstract argument alone cannot provide. The later sections on logotherapy, We'll return to this point, showing how his personal story adds credibility to his claims about meaning. The notion that early life shapes later thought can be seen in the way Viktor described his own search for purpose. In a 1946 essay, he wrote, "I was a child who loved to read, a student who felt the weight of expectation, a teenager who found a voice in music. All these pieces taught me that meaning is not given, it is made." This quote ties his childhood experiences directly to his philosophical conclusions. It also serves as a bridge to later parts of the video, where the process of finding meaning in everyday life will be explored. Viktor's family also gave him a language of hope. His mother often sang lullabies that spoke of light after darkness. One night, when Viktor was 8, his mother sang a song that ended with the line, "Even the night will end, and the sun will rise again." He later recalled this line as a reminder that hope can be a small fire in the heart, even when the world feels cold. This image of a tiny flame will appear again when the video discusses how logotherapy helps people keep a spark of purpose alive during hardship. The education system in Vienna at the turn of the century placed a strong emphasis on discipline and respect for authority. Viktor's teachers expected obedience and memorization. The pressure to conform sometimes clashed with his inner curiosity. He once wrote, "I felt torn between the desire to please my teachers and the need to ask why." This tension mirrors the modern student who feels forced to follow a set curriculum while yearning to explore personal interests. The example of a young student feeling pressure at school will be revisited later, when the video offers practical tips for finding meaning in academic life. In his teenage years, Viktor also joined a youth scouting group. The group organized hikes in the Austrian countryside, and the leader often spoke about the beauty of nature as a source of inner peace. One hike led the group to a high meadow where the view stretched over the city of Vienna. Standing there, Viktor felt a sense of awe that he could not explain. He later described this moment as a glimpse of something larger than myself. This experience contributed to his belief that meaning can be found in moments of wonder, a theme that will appear in later sections on the role of nature in logotherapy. The early influence of existential ideas, first heard in Jasper's talk, continued to grow. In 1920, when Viktor was 15, he read a small pamphlet by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche that discussed the concept of the will to power. Nietzsche argued that people create their own values and meanings. Viktor found the idea both daring and frightening. He wrote in his diary, "If I must create my own values, what will I choose?" This question stayed with him as he moved from student to doctor. The encounter with Nietzsche's bold claim that life has no preset meaning is a key stepping stone toward Viktor's later stance that meaning is something each person must find. Viktor's early career also intersected with the rise of psychoanalysis in Vienna. He attended lectures by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, listening to their theories about the unconscious mind and archetypes. While he respected their work, he felt that they missed a crucial point, the human drive to find purpose. He later said, "Freud taught us about pain, but he did not teach us how to rise above it." This critique will be echoed later when the video compares logotherapy to other therapeutic approaches, showing how Viktor's early observations led him to propose a new path. The first time Viktor tried to put his ideas into practice was during a summer internship at a psychiatric ward in 1930. He met a soldier who had lost both legs in an accident. The soldier was depressed and refused to eat. Viktor asked the man, "What did you love doing before the accident?" The soldier replied, "I used to play chess with my brother." Viktor encouraged him to teach chess to other patients. even though he could not move his own pieces. The soldier agreed, and soon the ward was filled with quiet games. The soldier's mood improved, and he began to smile again. Viktor saw that giving the patient a sense of purpose, even a small one, could change his outlook. This story illustrates how a simple hobby can become a source of meaning, a point that will be revisited when the video discusses how everyday activities can help people cope with stress. In 1933, Viktor married Tilly, a fellow student of literature. Their partnership was built on shared curiosity and a love of reading. Tilly often challenged Viktor's ideas, asking, "What if meaning is just a story we tell ourselves?" This question forced Viktor to sharpen his arguments and to look for evidence beyond personal anecdotes. Their dialogue shows how personal relationships can push a thinker to refine their theory. The marriage will be mentioned later when the video talks about how love and connection are central to finding meaning. The years leading up to the Second World War were a time of political unrest in Austria. Viktor Frankl entered Auschwitz on a cold morning in 1942. The train stopped and the doors opened to a scene of smoke, barbed wire, and a crowd of men and women who had been taken from their homes. The first thing that hit Frankl was the smell of burning wood and the sound of shouted orders. He remembered the way the SS guards forced each person to line up, to drop their belongings, and to march toward the gate. The gate was a metal fence that seemed to close in on the world outside. In that moment, Frankl felt the weight of a future that was unknown and frightening. He later wrote that the first step into the camp was like stepping into a dark room, where the lights had been switched off. Every morning, the prisoners gathered for roll call. The guards shouted a number, and each man or woman had to raise their hand to be counted. If a name was missed, the whole line was stopped, and the guards would demand that the missing person be found. The roll call lasted for hours. The cold wind cut through the thin clothing, and the sound of the guards' boots on the concrete echoed like a drumbeat. Frankl observed that the roll call was more than a way to keep track of people. It was a way to strip away identity. Each number became a label, a reminder that the world had reduced a human being to a digit. The feeling of being stuck in a long line at a grocery store can give a small hint of what the prisoners endured. Imagine a line that never moves, the lights flickering, the smell of stale bread filling the air, and a feeling that the end is far away. In a grocery line, a person may feel irritated, impatient, perhaps a little hopeless, but they still know that the line will end and they will go home. In Auschwitz, the line was endless, the end was unknown, and the hope of returning home was gone. The difference is not just the length of the line, but the loss of any promise that the line would ever end in a good place. A student waiting for test results can also help to picture the waiting that filled each day in the camp. The student checks the email, looks at the clock, wonders if the result will be good or bad. The student feels a knot in the stomach, a mix of fear and anticipation. In the camp, the waiting was for food, for a chance to see a loved one, for a small act of kindness. The waiting was a daily rhythm that could break a person's spirit if there was no sign of relief. The student may eventually receive a result, good or bad, and move on. The prisoner often never received a clear answer, only a continuation of the same harsh routine. Frankl watched how some prisoners clung to small acts of meaning. One man shared a piece of bread with a stranger, even though the man was hungry himself. Another prisoner whispered a poem to a friend, giving a brief moment of beauty in a place of cruelty. Frankl noted that these small gestures were like tiny lights in a dark room. They did not change the conditions of the camp, but they changed the inner world of the people who performed them. He wrote that when a person cannot change a situation, the only thing left is to change the way they see it. In other words, meaning can be found not by changing the world, but by changing one's attitude toward the world. One of Frankl's most famous quotes is, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." He meant that even when the outside world is cruel, a person can still choose how to respond inside. This idea became the core of his later work, called logotherapy, which means therapy through meaning. In the camp, logotherapy was not a formal treatment, but a way of surviving. Frankl saw that some prisoners who found a purpose, such as the hope of seeing a child again, or the desire to finish a manuscript, were more likely to stay alive. There are people who argue that suffering itself creates meaning. They say that the very act of enduring pain gives a person a story to tell, a badge of honor, a proof that they have lived. This view suggests that without great suffering, a person would not understand what it means to be alive. Frankl agreed that suffering can be a source of meaning, but he warned that suffering alone is not enough. He said that meaning must be chosen, not forced upon a person. If suffering is taken as the only source of meaning, then a person may become trapped in a cycle of looking for more pain, rather than seeking a purpose that lifts them beyond the pain. Another counter-argument is that only extreme trauma can teach purpose. Some thinkers claim that ordinary life does not have the depth needed to reveal a true sense of purpose, and that only the darkest moments can show what matters. This idea can make ordinary experiences seem shallow. Frankl responded by pointing to the many small moments in the camps that gave meaning. A song sung quietly, a memory of a loved one, a promise to survive for a future child. He argued that the same small moments can give meaning in everyday life, such as a parent caring for a child, a teacher guiding a student, or a volunteer helping a neighbor. The difference is not the size of the event, but the intention behind it. Frankl's own story provides a clear example of how meaning can be found even in the worst conditions. After his release, he learned that his wife, who had been taken to a different part of the camp, had survived. He described the moment of seeing her as a turning point that gave him a reason to live. He also recalled a time when a fellow prisoner asked him to write a letter for a family that had been separated. Frankl wrote the letter, and the act gave both men a sense of purpose. These stories show that meaning can appear in the smallest acts of caring, even when the world seems to have turned its back. The daily roll call also offered a chance to see how people responded to the same routine. Some prisoners stood perfectly still, eyes down, accepting the order without protest. Others whispered to each other, sharing a joke or a memory, trying to keep the mind alive. Frankl noticed that those who managed to keep a spark of humor or a thought of something beyond the fence were more likely to survive. He wrote that humor is a way to distance oneself from the immediate horror, to see the situation from a different angle. In ordinary life, humor can also help a person step back from a stressful situation, like a long line at a store, and find a way to stay calm. The arrival at Auschwitz is a story that has been told many times, but each detail adds to the picture of what Frankl experienced. The train doors opened, and the prisoners were forced to stand in the cold. The SS guards shouted, "Move!" and pushed them forward. Some people fell, and the guards beat them. The smell of fear mixed with the smell of the camp. Frankl felt the cold metal of the gate as he stepped through, and he felt a loss of his old identity. He remembered that his mind kept asking, "What will happen next?" The answer was unknown, and that uncertainty created a deep anxiety that stayed with him for the rest of his life. The daily roll call, on the other hand, was a routine that repeated every morning. The prisoners stood in rows, their numbers called one by one. If a name was missed, the whole line stopped, and the guards would demand that the missing person be found. The waiting was long, and the cold wind cut through the thin clothing. Frankl described the roll call as a test of both body and mind. It forced each person to confront the fact that they were still alive, even as the world around them tried to erase their humanity. The roll call became a moment where a person could decide whether to give in to despair or to hold on to a small inner purpose. In the modern world, the idea that meaning can be found in ordinary life is often ignored. People think that meaning only comes from big achievements, from fame, from wealth. Frankl's experience shows that meaning can be found in the smallest acts. A parent reading a bedtime story, a student helping a classmate, a worker taking a moment to smile at a stranger. The same way a prisoner might have found meaning by remembering a promise to a loved one. A person today might find meaning by keeping a promise to themselves to finish a project or to stay healthy. Frankl also used a simple analogy to explain his view. He said that life is like a river that flows through many rocks. The rocks represent the hardships, the rapids, the moments of pain. The water cannot stop the rocks, but it can flow around them, shaping the river's path. In the same way, a person cannot stop the hardships, but can choose how to move through them. The river still reaches the sea. Just as a person can still find purpose even when the rocks are sharp. This analogy helps to see that meaning does not require a smooth road, but a willingness to keep moving. A second analogy comes from a grocery store line. Imagine a line that seems endless, the lights flickering, the cashier moving slowly. If a person focuses only on the length of the line, they may feel angry and give up. If they instead think about the items they will buy, the dinner they will prepare, the family they will feed, they can find a purpose in the wait. The wait becomes a chance to plan, to think, to imagine a pleasant outcome. In the camp, the wait for food, for a letter, for a moment of rest could be turned into a mental rehearsal of a future that was still possible. This mental rehearsal gave a sense of direction, a reason to stay alive. The quote from Frankl that often appears in his writings is, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." This line sums up his belief that even when everything else is taken, the inner choice remains. In the camp, this meant that a prisoner could decide to see a small act of kindness as a sign of hope, or to see the same act as a reminder of loss. The choice to see hope or loss was a personal decision, not forced by the outside. Critics of Frankl's view sometimes say that focusing on attitude can be a way of blaming the victim. They argue that telling someone to choose a better attitude puts the burden on the person who is already suffering. Frankl understood this concern. He never said that the victims were at fault for their suffering. He only said that once the suffering is present, the person still has a choice about how to respond. The choice does not erase the pain, but it can give the pain a shape that is useful rather than destructive. Another criticism is that Frankl's ideas are too optimistic for the worst cases of cruelty. Some say that in places like Auschwitz, no amount of attitude could make a difference, that the system was designed to crush any sense of purpose. Frankl answered by pointing to the stories of those who survived because they held onto a purpose. He also noted that many who did not find a purpose died earlier. This is not to say that every person who survived had a purpose, but that purpose could be a factor that helped them endure. The evidence is not a proof that purpose guarantees survival, but it shows that purpose can be a powerful support. The link to later discussion of meaning in ordinary life will become clear when the story moves from the camps to the world after the war. Frankl returned to Vienna and began to teach, to write, to help people find meaning in their own lives. He used the same ideas that helped him survive, but applied them to everyday problems: job loss, illness, relationship issues. The same tools that helped a prisoner survive a roll call can help a student waiting for test results. The same. Viktor Frankl stepped out of the concentration camps with more than a scarred body. He carried a set of notes written on thin paper that had survived the heat of the ovens. Those notes held the seed of a new kind of therapy. He called it logotherapy, a word that means therapy through meaning. The idea grew from what he saw in the camps, from what he felt in the silence of the barracks, and from the thinkers who had shaped his early career. In the early 1930s, Frankl had trained as a neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna. He studied under Sigmund Freud, who taught that human behavior is driven by hidden wishes and urges. He also listened to Alfred Adler, who argued that people strive for power and superiority. Both men focused on the inner forces that push a person to act. Frankl admired their work, but he felt something was missing. He noticed that many patients spoke of a longing that could not be reduced to desire or power. They spoke of a need to find a purpose, a meaning that gave their lives direction. The war forced Frankl into a brutal laboratory. In the camps, he watched how some prisoners kept a spark of life, while others fell into despair. He saw a man who could not eat, not because he was hungry, but because he felt his life had no value. He saw a young woman who sang quietly to herself, even as the world fell apart around her. Frankl realized that the difference was not in the strength of the body, but in the strength of the mind. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance." That line became a cornerstone of his thinking. After the war, Vienna was a city trying to rebuild. In 1946, Frankl entered the lecture hall of the University of Vienna for his first public talk on the subject he had been shaping in the camps. The hall was packed with students, doctors, and journalists. He stood at the podium and spoke about the will to meaning, the idea that the main drive in human life is not pleasure or power, but the search for meaning. He told the audience that meaning can be found in three ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, by experiencing something or loving someone, and by adopting a new attitude toward unavoidable suffering. The listeners were stunned. A young student later recalled that Frankl's voice was calm but firm, and that the lecture felt like a lantern in a dark room. The following year, Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, was published. It combined his personal account of life in the camps with a clear presentation of logotherapy. The book spread quickly across Europe and then the United States. In its first edition, Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Readers found comfort in those words. The book sold millions of copies and turned a personal story into a global movement. Logotherapy rests on a simple premise. Life has meaning under all circumstances, and people can discover that meaning. To illustrate the idea, Frankl often used everyday examples. Imagine a person who has spent years working in a job that feels empty. One day, they decide to study art, to paint, to write, or to help others through a new career. The act of choosing a path that aligns with a deeper value gives them a sense of purpose. The change is not just a new skill. It is a new meaning that guides daily actions. Another example comes from parenthood. A parent may feel exhausted by the endless tasks of feeding, cleaning, and soothing a child. Yet when they see the child's first smile, hear the first word, or watch the first steps, a new purpose emerges. The parent's meaning is no longer tied to personal achievement, but to the growth of another human being. The love and responsibility become a source of meaning that sustains the parent through hardship. These stories are not abstract. They show how meaning works in ordinary life. Frankl believed that meaning can be as clear as a compass pointing north. When a person feels lost, the therapist helps them find the direction that feels true. The therapist does not tell the person what the direction is. Instead, the therapist asks questions, listens, and reflects back what the person says about what matters to them. In this way, the therapist becomes a guide, not a director. Logotherapy also offers practical tools. One tool is called deflection. It invites a person to shift focus away from themselves and towards something or someone else. If a patient worries about a performance anxiety, the therapist may suggest that the patient concentrate on the message they want to share, rather than on how they will be judged. This shift often reduces the pressure and opens a space for meaning to appear. Another tool is paradoxical intention. Here, a person is asked to do the very thing they fear. A man who fears public speaking might be told to try to speak as loudly and as awkwardly as possible. The absurdity of the request reduces the fear's power, and the person discovers that the outcome is not as terrible as imagined. By confronting the fear, the person can move toward a purpose that involves communication, rather than being blocked by anxiety. Critics have raised two main objections to logotherapy. The first objection says that therapy should focus on observable behavior, not on abstract ideas like meaning. Behaviorists argue that change comes from altering habits, reinforcement, and conditioning. They claim that meaning is too intangible to measure, and that a therapist should work with concrete actions instead of philosophical talk. In response, supporters of logotherapy point out that behavior and meaning are linked. When a person finds meaning, their behavior naturally changes. A student who discovers that learning helps them support a family will study harder. The therapist can still observe changes in behavior while also exploring meaning. The second objection claims that meaning is too vague to be treated. Some argue that meaning can mean many different things to different people, making it impossible to develop a standard therapy. They worry that a therapist might impose their own ideas of meaning on a client. Frankl anticipated this concern. He emphasized that meaning is unique to each individual. The therapist's role is to help the client uncover their own meaning, not to prescribe it. He wrote, "The meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. By respecting this variability, logotherapy stays flexible and personal." Early influences still echo in these debates. Freud's focus on the unconscious taught Frankl to listen carefully to hidden thoughts. Adler's emphasis on social interest reminded him that meaning often comes through relationships. Existential philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger spoke about authenticity and the human condition. Frankl borrowed the idea that each person must confront the existential vacuum, a feeling of emptiness that arises when life seems without purpose. He turned those philosophical concepts into a therapy that can be practiced in a clinic. Modern interpretations have taken Frankl's ideas into new fields. Positive psychology, a branch of psychology that studies what makes life worth living, often cites logotherapy as a forerunner. Researchers have linked a sense of purpose to better health outcomes, lower rates of depression, and longer lifespans. In workplaces, managers use Frankl's ideas to help employees find purpose in their tasks, leading to higher motivation and lower turnover. In schools, teachers encourage students to set personal goals that reflect their values, creating a sense of meaning that improves learning. Even in technology, logotherapy finds a place. Apps that track gratitude or purpose use the same principle. Help the user notice moments that matter and guide them toward actions that align with those moments. The core idea remains the same: meaning can be cultivated, and when it is, life feels richer. A vivid analogy can make the concept clearer. Think of a garden. A garden without any plants looks empty, but it still has soil, sunlight, and water. The gardener decides what to grow. If the gardener plants vegetables, the garden provides food. If the gardener plants flowers, the garden offers beauty. The meaning of the garden changes with the gardener's intention. Likewise, a person's life is the soil, and meaning is the seed they choose to plant. Logotherapy helps the person select the seed that will grow into something fulfilling. Another analogy is a compass. A compass does not move the traveler, it shows direction. When a hiker is lost in a forest, the compass points north, and the hiker can decide which path to follow. In therapy, the therapist provides the compass of meaning, while the client decides the route. The journey becomes purposeful, even if the terrain is rough. Historical anecdotes add texture to the story. The first lecture in Vienna after the war was held in a hall that still bore the marks of bomb damage. The seats were cracked, and the walls were stained. Yet, when Frankl began to speak, a hush fell over the room. A veteran of the camps sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on Frankl. After the talk, the veteran approached the podium and whispered, "You gave me a reason to live again." That moment illustrated how a single idea could reignite hope in a broken world. The publication of Man's Search for Meaning also carries a story. The first print run was modest, and the publisher was unsure whether the book would sell. Frankl sent a copy to a friend in New York, who read it on a long train ride. The friend was so moved that he wrote a review in a major newspaper, calling the book "Our Beacon of Light in the Darkness of the 20th Century." The review sparked interest, and the book soon became a bestseller. The story shows how a personal testimony can spread a therapeutic vision far beyond its origin. In practice, logotherapy offers a set of steps that can be used in everyday life. First, the person is invited to identify a situation that feels empty or painful. Second, the therapist asks what the person values most in that situation. Third, the person explores how they can act in line with that value, even in small ways. Fourth, the person reflects on the outcome and adjusts as needed. This cycle repeats, building a sense of purpose over time. Consider a teacher who feels burned out. Using logotherapy, the teacher might recall the moment a student thanked them for explaining a difficult concept. The teacher discovers that the act of making ideas clear is meaningful. The teacher then plans to spend a few extra minutes each week helping students one-on. The small change brings back a sense of purpose, and the burnout eases. Or think of a retiree who worries about having no role. By exploring meaning, the retiree may realize that sharing stories from a lifetime of work can help younger generations. The retiree begins to volunteer at a community center, telling stories and offering advice. The new role fills the retiree's days with purpose. These examples show how meaning can be found in both big decisions and tiny moments. Logotherapy does not demand a grand life project. It asks the person to notice where meaning already exists and to nurture it. The legacy of Viktor Frankl continues to grow. His early observations in the camps turned into a therapy that respects the human need for purpose. The first lecture in Vienna and the publication of his book marked the public birth of logotherapy. The everyday examples of a career change and a parent's love illustrate how meaning works in daily life. The analogies of a garden and a compass help listeners picture the abstract ideas. The counter-arguments about behavior focus and vagueness are answered by showing how meaning shapes actions and can be personalized. Modern research and applications prove that the search for meaning is still relevant today. In the end, logotherapy reminds each person that meaning is not a distant treasure hidden far away. It is a thread woven through. The story of Viktor Frankl's ideas about freedom, will, and responsibility begins in a time of great suffering. In the early 20th century, many thinkers tried to answer the question of why people act the way they do. Sigmund Freud said that hidden urges and childhood trauma drive behavior. Alfred Adler, a colleague of Freud, argued that people are driven by a need to feel important. In the same era, a young Austrian doctor named Viktor Frankl listened to these voices and then asked a different question. He wondered whether a person could still choose a path even when everything else was taken away. Frankl's answer was that there is a special kind of freedom that lives inside each person. He called it the freedom to choose one's attitude. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." This line comes from his book, Man's Search for Meaning. The sentence is short, but it holds a big idea. It says that even in a prison camp, a person can decide how to feel about the situation. The idea of a free attitude grew out of Frankl's own experience. In 1942, he was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp. The camp was a place where food, sleep, and even basic human dignity were stripped away. Yet Frankl noticed that some prisoners kept a spark of hope while others fell into despair. He asked a fellow prisoner, a young man named Ernst, why some men still laughed or sang. Ernst answered that he imagined a future in which he would reunite with his family. He chose to focus on that imagined future instead of the present horror. Frankl later wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This short exchange shows the core of the freedom to choose attitude. Another key moment in Frankl's life was his debate with followers of Freud after the war. In 1955, he gave a lecture in Vienna where a group of psychoanalysts asked, "Is not the unconscious mind the true driver of all action?" Frankl answered, "The unconscious can push, but the conscious mind can still decide where to turn." He explained that the will to find meaning is a conscious choice. He said that meaning can be found in work, in love, and even in suffering. The audience was surprised. They expected a purely scientific answer, but Frankl offered a human answer. This debate highlighted the clash between a deterministic view of the mind and Frankl's view that humans have a will to seek meaning. Frankl's core concepts can be split into three parts: freedom to choose attitude, the will to find meaning, and personal responsibility. Each part is linked to the others. Freedom to choose attitude is the first step. The will to find meaning is the drive that follows the choice. Responsibility is the duty that comes after the meaning is found. To see how the first part works, Imagine a simple, everyday scene. A friend calls and asks for help moving a heavy couch. The person receiving the call could say, "I am too tired. I cannot help." Or they could say, "I will help because my friend needs me." The situation is the same, but the attitude changes. The choice of attitude is a small act of freedom. It does not change the weight of the couch, but it changes the inner feeling of the person. The person who chooses to help feels a sense of purpose, while the person who refuses may feel guilt later. A second everyday example shows the same idea. Student has free time on a Saturday. The student can spend the hours scrolling on a phone or can spend the hours learning a new skill, like playing a song on a guitar. Both options are available. The decision to learn something new is an act of choosing an attitude toward the free time. It says, "I will use this time to grow." The decision to scroll says, "I will let the time pass." Both choices are possible, but the first one creates a feeling of progress. These simple choices illustrate the larger claim that even when external forces are strong, a person can still choose how to react. Frankl did not say that all choices are easy. He said that the freedom is always there, even if it is hard to see. He used the word inner freedom to describe it. The inner freedom is like a small candle that can stay lit even in a storm. The second core idea, the will to find meaning, builds on the first. Once a person has chosen an attitude, they can look for a purpose that fits that attitude. Frankl called this the will to meaning. He argued that this will is stronger than the will to pleasure, which the philosopher Epicurus talked about, or the will to power, which Nietzsche described. Frankl said that people are driven by a deep need to feel that their life matters. A story from the camp shows this will in action. A prisoner named Joseph was assigned to a work detail that involved moving heavy stones. The work was brutal and often ended in death. One day, Joseph decided that he would use the work to practice a mental math skill he had learned before the war. He counted each stone, added the numbers in his head, and imagined a future where he would teach this skill to children. The work became a way to keep his mind sharp. The meaning he found in the task helped him survive. Frankl later wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." This quote, originally from Nietzsche, was adopted by Frankl to show that a purpose can help a person endure any condition. The third core idea, personal responsibility, follows the first two. If a person can choose an attitude and can find a meaning, then they also have the duty to act on that meaning. Frankl believed that responsibility is not a burden, but a sign of freedom. He said, "We are responsible for what we become. The responsibility is not imposed by outside forces. It comes from inside. It asks a person to act in line with the meaning they have found." One modern example of responsibility can be seen in a workplace. An employee discovers that the company's product can be used in a harmful way. The employee can ignore the problem or can raise a concern and work to change the product. The choice to speak up reflects responsibility to the larger meaning of doing good work. The employee's freedom to choose an attitude toward the problem, the will to find a better purpose for the product, and the responsibility to act all work together. Frankl's ideas have been taken up by many fields. In psychology, therapists use logotherapy, the name of Frankl's method, to help clients find purpose. In education, teachers ask students to set personal goals that give meaning to their studies. In business, leaders talk about purpose-driven companies. All of these uses rest on the three core concepts. However, not everyone agrees that the freedom to choose attitude is always present. One counterargument says that external forces can limit freedom. For example, a person living under a totalitarian regime may be punished for any dissent. In such a case, the choice of attitude may seem impossible. Critics point to studies that show stress hormones can impair decision-making. They argue that when the brain is flooded with fear, the ability to choose a positive attitude is reduced. Frankl responded to this criticism by saying that the choice does not have to be grand. It can be as small as deciding to keep a private thought of hope. He wrote, "Even in the worst of circumstances, the last human freedom is to choose one's attitude." He meant that the choice can be silent, internal, and still count. The counter-argument still raises an important point. The level of freedom can vary with the level of oppression. A second counter-argument says that personal responsibility can be overwhelming. If a person believes they must find meaning in every moment, they may feel pressure to succeed at all times. This can lead to anxiety and burnout. Some philosophers argue that not all meaning has to be earned. Some meaning can be given by community or tradition. They warn that an overemphasis on personal responsibility can make people blame themselves for suffering that is beyond their control. Frankl acknowledged this danger. He wrote that responsibility should be balanced with self-compassion. He said, "Responsibility is not a punishment, it is a chance to act." He encouraged people to see responsibility as a gentle guide, not a harsh judge. The balance between freedom, will, and responsibility is a delicate one. To make the ideas clearer, an analogy can be used. Think of a sailor on a rough sea. The wind and waves are the external forces that cannot be changed. The sailor can choose how to set the sail. That choice is the freedom to choose attitude. The sailor can decide what destination to aim for. That decision is the will to find meaning. Finally, the sailor must steer the boat toward that destination. That act is personal responsibility. Even when the storm is strong, the sailor still has these three tools. A second analogy uses a garden. The soil and climate are the conditions that cannot be altered easily. The gardener can decide what seeds to plant. That decision is the freedom to choose attitude. The gardener can decide what kind of garden to grow: flowers, vegetables, a mix. That is the will to find meaning. The gardener must water, weed, and tend the plants. That work is responsibility. The garden will grow differently depending on how the gardener uses these three steps. Historical anecdotes help to see how Frankl used these ideas in real life. The first anecdote is the conversation with Ernst, the fellow prisoner. Frankl asked, "What keeps you alive?" Ernst answered, "I think of my wife's smile, the day I will hear her voice again." Frankl noted that this hope gave Ernst the strength to carry a heavy load. The second anecdote is the debate in Vienna with Freud's followers. When asked whether meaning was just a wish, Frankl replied, "A wish is a thought. Meaning is a purpose that guides action." He showed that meaning is not a vague feeling, but a concrete goal that can shape behavior. Primary sources give voice to these moments. In Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl wrote, "When we are faced with a situation we cannot change, we are challenged to change ourselves." In a later lecture he said, "The meaning of life is to be discovered in each moment of living. It is not a hidden treasure to be found later." Freud's followers, in a 1955 journal, wrote, "The unconscious dominates all conscious choice." Frankl's reply, recorded in the same journal, was, The unconscious may suggest, but the conscious mind decides. Modern interpretations of Frankl's core concepts appear in many places. In positive psychology, researchers talk about meaningful work as a predictor of happiness. In neuroscience, studies show that the brain's prefrontal cortex lights up when people think about long-term goals. This area is linked to the will to find meaning. In social activism, people cite Frankl's ideas when they speak about standing up for justice, even under oppression. They say that the freedom to choose attitude fuels the courage to act. The ideas also connect to later sections of the video that will look at meaning. In Viktor Frankl once said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That simple line holds the key to the idea that work can be more than a paycheck. It can be a place where a person meets freedom and responsibility, and where meaning can grow. Frankl was a neurologist before the war. He spent long days studying brain injuries and the ways the mind can heal. He watched patients who had lost much, yet still found a reason to keep living. Those early years taught him that purpose can appear even in the smallest acts. After the war, Frankl walked out of a concentration camp with a new mission. He met a factory manager who was trying to rebuild his plant. The manager asked, "How can my workers find hope after such loss?" Frankl answered, "Give them a task that matters to them, and they will find a reason to rise." The manager took the advice, and soon the factory began to hum with new energy. This story shows how work can be a bridge from suffering to meaning. The core of Frankl's thought is called logotherapy. Logotherapy means the search for meaning. It is not a set of rules, but a guide that asks each person to look for a purpose that fits their own life. In the realm of work, logotherapy asks, what part of the job can give a person a sense of value? It does not matter if the job is a desk job, a kitchen, or a field. The answer lies in the small choices that turn a task into a gift. Consider a cashier at a small grocery store. Every morning she puts on her name tag, greets each customer, and scans items with steady hands. To an outside observer, the work may look routine, yet she finds meaning in the brief moments of connection. When a mother asks for a recommendation, the cashier smiles and offers a suggestion. When an elderly man forgets his wallet, she offers a kind word and a small discount. She says later, "I feel good when I can help someone have a smoother day." In those tiny exchanges, she experiences freedom. She can choose to be kind, even when the line is long. She also feels responsibility, because each choice shapes the mood of the store. The meaning she finds is not in the salary alone, but in the feeling that she made a small difference. Now picture a teacher in a middle school classroom. She walks in each day with a stack of worksheets, a chalkboard, and a hope that some student will catch a spark. When a shy boy finally reads a paragraph out loud, she feels a lift in her chest. When a group of students works together to solve a math puzzle, she sees a glimpse of teamwork. She tells herself, "My job is not just to deliver facts, but to help these young minds grow." The teacher's sense of purpose comes from watching growth. She is free to design lessons that spark curiosity, and she bears the responsibility of shaping future citizens. The meaning she draws from work is not measured in pay, but in the visible change in her students. Both the cashier and the teacher show how daily work can become a source of purpose. They each have the freedom to choose how they act, and they each accept the responsibility that their actions affect others. Frankl believed that this freedom-responsibility pair is at the heart of a meaningful life. There are arguments that challenge this view. One common claim is that work is merely a way to earn money. The idea is that a job is a contract. You give time, you receive a paycheck. From that angle, meaning is a luxury that only some can afford. The argument says, if you need the money, you cannot worry about purpose. It suggests that meaning belongs to art, religion, or family, not to the grind of daily labor. A second counter-argument says that meaning cannot be forced. It claims that if a person does not feel a deep calling, then trying to label a job as meaningful is a false promise. The claim warns that forcing purpose can lead to frustration, burnout, or even dishonesty. It argues that meaning should arise naturally, not be attached to any task. Frankl would respond to the first claim by pointing out that even when a person works for money, they still have the freedom to decide how to act within that work. The cashier can still smile, the teacher can still inspire. The paycheck is only one part of the picture. The second claim meets a similar reply. Frankl never said that meaning appears automatically. He said that a person can search for it, even in the smallest acts. The search itself is a choice, and that choice is an act of freedom. When a person decides to look for meaning, they take responsibility for their own outlook. Real-world applications of this idea are easy to see. In many companies, managers now talk about purpose-driven work. They ask employees to write a personal purpose statement that links their daily tasks to a larger goal. In schools, teachers are encouraged to use project-based learning, which lets students see how knowledge can solve real problems. In healthcare, nurses talk about the privilege of caring, a phrase that mirrors Frankl's view that even routine care can hold deep meaning. Modern thinkers have taken Frankl's ideas and mixed them with new research. Positive psychology, a field that studies what makes life worth living, often cites meaning as a key factor for happiness. Researchers have found that people who feel their work matters report lower stress and higher life satisfaction. Some scholars argue that technology can help by giving workers more control over how they spend their time, thus expanding the space for meaning. Others warn that too much focus on purpose can turn work into a moral test, making people feel guilty if they cannot find meaning. The debate continues, but the core idea remains. Meaning is possible in work when freedom and responsibility are present. An analogy can help clarify this. Think of a garden. The soil is the job itself, the tasks, the schedule, the pay. The gardener's choice of what seeds to plant, how often to water, and when to prune is the freedom. The responsibility is the care taken to make sure the plants grow. If the gardener decides to plant roses, the garden becomes a place of beauty. If the gardener chooses weeds, the garden may look dull. The same plot of land can become a source of pride or a source of frustration, depending on the choices made. In the same way, a job can become a place of meaning when a person uses freedom to shape it and takes responsibility for the outcome. Another story from history adds depth. In the early 1950s, a small town in Austria rebuilt after the war. A group of former soldiers, now factory workers, were asked to produce simple wooden toys. The manager, remembering Frankl's advice, told them to think of each toy as a smile for a child. The workers began to talk about the joy their toys would bring, and their work turned from a chore into a mission. Production rose, and the town's morale improved. This anecdote shows how a simple shift in perspective can turn ordinary labor into a source of hope. A second anecdote comes from Frankl's own clinic after he returned to Vienna. He treated a young woman who had lost her husband in the war. She came to his office with a job as a clerk in a government office. She felt empty, as if the work was just a way to pass time. Frankl asked her to notice one small act each day, perhaps handing a document to a colleague or greeting a visitor. He told her, "When you see a chance to help, you are already choosing meaning." She began to write down those moments, and over weeks she felt a growing sense of purpose. The clerk later said that the tiny acts gave her a reason to get up each morning. This story illustrates how even the most routine job can hold a spark of meaning when a person looks for it. Frankl's own words often return to the theme of freedom. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." In the context of work, that freedom is the choice to see each task as an opportunity to act with kindness, to learn, or to help. The responsibility is the willingness to act on that choice, even when it is hard. When a cashier decides to greet a customer with a warm smile, that is an act of freedom. When she follows through, even on a busy day, that is responsibility. When a teacher decides to spend an extra minute with a student who is struggling, that is freedom. When she stays after class to explain a concept, that is responsibility. In both cases, meaning grows from the pairing of those two elements. The idea that work can be a source of meaning does not mean that every job will feel like a calling. It means that each person can look for a point where their actions matter to someone else. It also means that meaning can be built over time, not forced in a single moment. A person may start by noticing a small act of help, then later see a pattern of contribution. The process itself is an exercise of freedom, and each step is a sign of responsibility. In modern life, many people feel that their jobs are just a way to pay the bills. That feeling is understandable, especially when work feels repetitive or disconnected from personal values. Yet Frankl's lesson suggests that even in a repetitive job, a person can find a tiny window of meaning. It might be the moment a co-worker thanks them for a quick favor, or the time they notice a customer smile after a helpful suggestion. Those moments are like tiny lights in a long hallway. They do not erase the hallway, but they make walking through it less dull. Critics who say meaning cannot be forced also have a point. If a person tries to label every task as meaningful, they may feel pressure and become resentful. Frankl would likely advise balance. He would ask the person to look for meaning, not to demand it. He would remind them that the search itself is a free act. If a person cannot find meaning in a task, they can still choose an attitude of dignity, of patience, or of curiosity. Those attitudes are themselves forms of meaning, even if the task itself feels bland. The freedom to choose one's attitude is a powerful tool. It does not require a change in the external world, only a change inside. A factory worker can decide to see his role as part of a larger supply chain that brings food to families. A nurse can decide to view each patient's story as a chance to learn about resilience. These choices are small, but they add up. The responsibility part of the equation reminds people that meaning is not a passive gift. It requires action. The cashier must actually listen. The teacher must actually plan a lesson that reaches a student. Without action, the idea of meaning stays on paper. Responsibility turns thought into practice. In recent years, companies have begun to measure employee purpose alongside profit. Surveys ask workers how often they feel their work matters. Results show that teams with higher purpose scores also have lower turnover and higher productivity. This data supports Frankl's claim that meaning is linked to how people act, not just how they feel. At the same time, some researchers warn that purpose can become a burden. If a company says everyone must find meaning, some employees may feel blamed for not feeling fulfilled. The lesson here is that meaning should be offered, not imposed. The freedom to choose must stay intact. Frankl's own life is a living proof of this balance. In the camps, he could not change the walls or the guards, but he could change his inner stance. He chose to see each day as a chance to help a fellow prisoner find hope. He took responsibility for his own words, even when they seemed small. That attitude gave him a reason to survive. After the war, he turned that lesson into a guide for everyday life, showing that any setting, even a grocery aisle, can hold a spark of purpose. In the story of the cashier, the simple act of offering a helpful suggestion becomes a tiny beacon. In the story of the teacher, watching a student's confidence grow becomes a bright moment. Both stories illustrate how work can be a place where freedom and responsibility meet, creating meaning. To bring the idea, the story of meaning in relationships begins with a simple idea. Humans are not alone. They reach out, they hold, they care. In the work of Viktor Frankl, love is more than a feeling. It is a path to purpose. Earlier, the discussion of freedom showed that each person can decide how to act, even when outside forces try to control. That same freedom appears in love. When a person chooses to love, the choice itself creates meaning. Later, the talk about suffering will show how love can soften pain. The bridge between freedom and suffering is built on connection. Frankl grew up in a family that valued close bonds. He saw how his mother's love gave him strength. In his own writing, he said that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. He wrote, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality." That line shows that love is a way to see the true self of another. It also shows that seeing another's true self can give a person a reason to live. The origins of this view go back to ancient thought. The Greek philosopher Aristotle said that friendship is a part of the good life. He called it philia, a bond that helps people grow. Later, the Christian tradition spoke of agape, a selfless love that looks beyond personal gain. Frankl took those ideas and placed them in a modern setting. He argued that love is a concrete way to find meaning, not just an abstract ideal. One key thinker who helped shape Frankl's view was the psychologist Carl Rogers. Rogers believed that people need genuine acceptance to thrive. He called this unconditional positive regard. Frankl agreed that being accepted helps a person feel valued. He added that love goes further. Love lets a person see the future possibilities in another. In a letter to a friend, Frankl wrote, "When I look at my wife, I see not only who she is now, but who she may become." That simple line shows how love can point to a future that matters. The main argument for meaning in relationships is clear. When a person cares for someone else, they step outside themselves. They become part of a story larger than their own. That step creates a purpose that cannot be taken away. Frankl illustrated this with a story from his own life. After the war, he walked out of a concentration camp. He was weak, thin, and frightened. In the distance, he saw a figure he recognized. It was his wife, Eleanor. She ran toward him, arms outstretched. He fell into her embrace. He later wrote, "In that moment I felt that I was again a man, not a victim of the camps." The reunion gave him a reason to live beyond the horror he had seen. The love he felt for his wife lifted him out of despair. A second anecdote shows the power of love in a different setting. A mother once came to Frankl after the loss of her child. She was broken, her eyes empty. Frankl listened. He asked her to speak of the love she felt for her son. She described the small moments, the way he laughed, the way he held her hand. As she spoke, a quiet calm settled over her. Frankl said, "Your love for your son lives on in you. It can become a source of meaning even now." The mother left with the sense that her love was still alive, even without the child's presence. This shows that love can survive loss and still give purpose. These stories are not only about the past. They can be seen in everyday life. Imagine a sibling who cares for an aging parent. The sibling wakes early, prepares meals, helps with medicine. The work is hard, sometimes tiring, yet the sibling feels a deep sense of purpose. The parent's smile, the quiet gratitude, become a sign that the effort matters. The sibling sees a line of meaning that stretches from past family love to present care. The act of caring is not just a duty. It is a way to keep the bond alive. In Frankl's terms, the sibling chooses an attitude of love, and that choice creates meaning. A second example is a friend who supports a roommate through a crisis. The roommate loses a job, feels hopeless, and isolates. The friend calls each day, brings meals, sits in silence, and listens without judgment. The friend does not solve the problem, but the presence itself becomes a beacon. The roommate begins to see that someone cares. That care helps the roommate find a reason to get up, to look for new work, to keep trying. The friend's love becomes a source of purpose for both. The friend feels needed, and the roommate feels valued. The relationship creates a loop of meaning. These two examples show how love can turn ordinary moments into meaningful ones. They also show that meaning does not require grand gestures. Small acts, done with genuine care, can be enough. Frankl called this the will to meaning. It is the drive to find purpose in what one does. Love is a main tool for that drive. However, not everyone agrees that relationships always bring meaning. One counterargument says that love can cause pain. When a loved one dies, when a bond breaks, the hurt can be severe. Some argue that this pain outweighs any benefit. They claim that relying on others makes a person vulnerable. If a person's meaning depends on another, loss can leave them empty. This view points to the dark side of love. Frankl answered this concern by pointing to the freedom to choose one attitude. Even when loss occurs, a person can decide how to respond. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." In the case of loss, a person can choose to honor the love that was shared, to keep its meaning alive rather than sink into despair. The freedom to choose remains, even when the relationship ends. A second counterargument claims that love alone cannot give meaning. It says that meaning also needs work, achievement, or personal growth. Love by itself may feel warm, but may not guide a person toward larger goals. Critics point to people who love deeply, but feel stuck in life. They argue that love must be combined with other sources of purpose. Frankl agreed that love is not the only source of meaning, but he said it is a powerful one. He wrote, "The meaning of life is to be found in every moment of living. It is not a distant goal. When love is present, it can point a person toward other goals." The love for a parent can inspire a career in caregiving. The love for a friend can spark a desire to study psychology. In this way, love can be a seed that grows into broader purpose. It does not replace work or growth, but it can feed them. Modern interpretations of Frankl's idea of love as meaning have grown. Today, researchers study social connectedness and find that people with strong relationships live longer and report higher life satisfaction. In therapy, clinicians often ask clients to identify meaningful relationships as a way to build resilience. The idea that love can be a source of purpose is now part of many self-help books. The concept also appears in positive psychology, where meaningful relationships rank high among the factors that make life worth living. An analogy can help explain this. Think of a garden. Each plant needs water, sunlight, and soil. Love is like water. Without water, the plant wilts. With water, the plant can grow taller, produce fruit, and survive storms. The garden may also need sunlight, work, and soil, personal values. All three together create a thriving garden. In the same way, love supplies the nourishment that lets a person grow toward meaning. Another analogy uses a compass. A compass points north, giving direction. Love can act as a compass for a person's life. When a person feels lost, the memory of love for a parent, a partner, or a friend can point toward a path. The compass does not move the person. The person must walk. But without a direction, wandering can feel pointless. Love provides that direction. Historical anecdotes further illustrate the power of love. In the early days of the concentration camp, Frankl met a mother who had lost her child. She clutched a tiny piece of cloth, the only reminder of her son. Frankl sat with her and asked what she remembered about the child. She spoke of the child's laugh, the way he liked to draw. As she spoke, tears fell, but also a calm settled. Frankl later noted that the mother's love gave her a reason to keep breathing. The mother's story became a lesson that love can survive even the worst conditions. A second anecdote comes from the moment Frankl left the camp. He was weak, his hands trembling. He saw a figure in the distance. It was his wife, Eleanor, who had survived the same camp. She ran toward him, shouting his name. When they embraced, Frankl felt a surge of strength. He later wrote, "In that instant I felt that I was again a man, not a victim of the camps." The reunion showed that love can lift a person out of the deepest despair. It gave Frankl a reason to live, even after the horrors he had witnessed. These stories connect to the earlier discussion of freedom. The choice to love, to care, is an act of freedom. Even in a place where everything else was taken, love remained a free choice. That choice created meaning. The later discussion of suffering will show that love can also soften the pain of suffering. When a person suffers, the presence of love can turn pain into a chance to grow. Real-world applications of Frankl's view appear in many fields. In nursing, caregivers often talk about meaningful work. They find purpose when they see the gratitude of patients and families. In education, teachers who build strong bonds with students report higher job satisfaction. In business, leaders who foster a culture of care see more engaged employees. All of these examples show that love and connection can be a source of purpose in diverse settings. Modern thinkers have expanded Frankl's ideas. Some argue that digital connections can also provide meaning if they are authentic. Others warn that shallow online interactions may give a false sense of connection. The core idea remains. Genuine love, whether in person or through heartfelt communication, can create purpose. To bring the ideas together, consider the sibling caring for an aging parent. The sibling may feel tired, may face financial strain, but the love for the parent gives a reason to keep going. The sibling's choice to stay, to help, is an act of freedom. When the parent smiles, the sibling feels that the effort mattered. If the parent passes away, the sibling can still honor the love by remembering the good times, by sharing stories, by continuing the values learned. The love does not end with death. It transforms into memory and purpose. Now think of the friend supporting a roommate. The friend may face their own challenges, yet they choose to be present. That choice is a free act. When the roommate recovers, the friend sees the impact of their care. Even if the roommate later moves away, the friend carries the memory of having helped. That memory can guide future actions, encouraging the friend to be there for others. The love becomes a pattern that builds meaning across life. Both stories show that love is not a static feeling. It is an active choice that shapes a life. The choice is free, and the result can soften suffering. This links back to the earlier point that freedom is the basis for meaning, and to the later point that suffering can be transformed by love. Critics who say love causes pain are not wrong. Love can bring grief when loss occurs, but Frankl's view does not deny pain. He says that pain is part of life, but meaning can be found even in pain. The love that caused the grief can also. When Viktor Frankl first wrote about suffering, he did not try to make pain look good. He said that pain can become a road that leads to meaning. In his own words, he wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That simple line shows the core of his thought. It tells a person that even if the world is harsh, a choice still exists inside. In a camp in World War I, Frankl fell ill with a severe fever. The doctors said his chances were low. He lay in a thin blanket, shivering, while the cold wind blew through the barracks. He could have given up. Instead, he used the moment to look inside. He asked himself why he was still alive. He decided that his life could still have a purpose, that his future could still help others. He survived the fever, and later he used that experience to write about the power of inner choice. He later wrote, "The one thing we can give to the world is our own attitude." That quote came from his own notebook after the illness. Later in life, Frankl faced another health crisis. He suffered a heart attack in his 70s. The doctors warned him that the next attack could be fatal. He lay in a hospital bed, feeling the weight of his own mortality. He did not see the event as a punishment. He saw it as another chance to find meaning. He told his family that he would use the time to finish his work and to help his patients understand that meaning can be found even at the end of life. He survived that crisis as well, and his later lectures often spoke of the meaning that can be found in the face of death. These two stories show that suffering can be a teacher. The teacher does not ask for a perfect life. It only asks that the person look inside and decide what to do with the pain. Now think of a runner who breaks a leg during a race. The runner feels sharp pain, cannot move, and must stop training for months. The injury seems to take away the chance to compete. The runner can stay angry or can use the time to learn new things. He can study the science of movement, read about nutrition, or mentor younger athletes. When the bone heals, the runner returns to the track with a deeper understanding of his own body and a new purpose to help others avoid injury. The broken bone becomes a path to meaning, not just a loss. A second everyday example is a person who loses a job. The loss feels like a blow to identity. Bills still need to be paid, and the future looks uncertain. The person can sink into despair, or can see the gap as a chance to explore a new career, to study a subject that always interested them, or to start a small business. In many stories, people who lost jobs found a new calling that they would have missed if they had stayed in the same position. The pain of loss becomes a stepping stone to a new life. Both examples show a pattern. First, the person feels the pain. Second, the person makes a choice about how to view the pain. Third, the person takes an action that creates meaning. This pattern matches Frankl's idea of logotherapy. Logotherapy is a type of therapy that focuses on meaning. It does not try to fix thoughts or change behavior directly. Instead, it asks the person to find a purpose that can be reached even in hard times. The therapist helps the person see a future goal, a value, or a love that can give the present pain a reason. Critics sometimes say that suffering is pointless. They argue that pain is just damage, and that looking for meaning in it is a way to avoid the real problem. They claim that the world is indifferent, and that trying to find meaning only adds more stress. This view can sound strong because it points out that many people do suffer without ever finding a purpose. It is true that not every pain becomes a lesson. Some wounds stay raw. Yet Frankl did not say that every single suffering must become a meaning. He said that meaning is possible, not guaranteed. He believed that the human spirit can try, even if it sometimes fails. Another common counter-argument says that trauma cannot produce meaning. Some psychologists argue that trauma can damage the brain, making it hard to think about purpose. They point to studies that show people with severe PTSD often feel hopeless and cannot see any good in their experience. This criticism warns against forcing a meaning onto a painful event. Frankl agreed that forcing a meaning can be harmful. He taught that the search for meaning must be genuine, not an imposed label. He suggested that meaning can arise naturally when a person looks for it, not when they are told to find it. Both counter-arguments have a point. They remind us that suffering can be brutal. They remind us that meaning is not a magic cure. Yet the stories of the runner, the job loser, and Frankl himself show that meaning can appear when a person decides to act. The decision to act is the key. It is a small step, like choosing to stand up after a fall. That step can grow into a larger purpose. Frankl used a simple analogy to explain his idea. He compared life to a river. The river flows no matter what rocks are in its way. The water can be calm or turbulent, but it never stops moving. A person can be like the water, moving forward even when stones block the path. The stones are the suffering. The river does not stop because of the stones. It finds a way around them. In the same way, a person can find a way to keep moving, to find meaning even when suffering is present. A second analogy comes from gardening. A seed is buried in dark soil. It feels pressure, darkness, and lack of air. Yet the seed does not give up. It pushes a tiny root down and a shoot up. The seed becomes a plant because it used the pressure to grow. Suffering is like the soil. It can press, but it can also give the chance to grow deeper roots of meaning. Historical anecdotes give more depth. In the concentration camp, Frankl saw many people give up hope. Some prisoners stopped eating, some stopped speaking. Frankl watched a young man who had lost his family. The young man could have died in the cold. Instead, he whispered a promise to his mother that he would write a book after the war. That promise gave him the strength to survive the winter. The promise was a meaning that helped him bear the pain. After the war, Frankl walked into a lecture hall in Vienna. He was invited to speak about his experience. He could have talked only about the horrors. Instead, he chose to talk about the human ability to choose an attitude. He said, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." That line still echoes in classrooms today. It shows how a painful past can become a teaching tool for many. In the later health crisis, Frankl's doctors warned him that his heart might not hold much longer. He faced the reality that death could come soon. He could have spent his last days in fear. He instead wrote letters to his family, telling them how much love he felt, and he recorded his thoughts on meaning at the end of life. He said, "When death is present, life becomes more vivid." He used his own suffering to show that even the final chapter can have meaning. Logotherapy uses three main ways to find meaning. The first way is through work or deeds. Doing something useful can give purpose. The runner who later coaches others uses this path. The second way is through love. Feeling love for another person can give meaning even when everything else is bleak. Frankl often spoke of his love for his wife, Eleanor, as a beacon in the camp. The third way is through attitude toward unavoidable suffering. When pain cannot be avoided, a person can still decide how to view it. This third path is what Frankl called the tragic optimism. It means being hopeful even when the situation is tragic. Applying this to everyday life, a person who loses a job can look for work that helps others, can spend time with family, or can choose to view the loss as a chance to learn patience. Each of those choices follows one of the three paths. The runner can coach, can love the sport, or can see the injury as a chance to appreciate the body's ability to heal. Modern thinkers have taken Frankl's ideas further. Some psychologists link logotherapy to positive psychology, which studies what makes life worth living. They find that having a purpose predicts better health and longer life. Researchers have measured that people who see meaning in their suffering have lower stress hormones. This shows that the idea is not just poetic. It has real effects on the body. In recent years, some philosophers have asked how meaning works at the end of life. They wonder if a person can find meaning when death is near. Frankl answered that question by saying that meaning does not stop at death. He wrote, "The meaning of life is to be found in every moment, even in the final breath." This view suggests that a person can look back on a painful life and still see a pattern of purpose. It also means that a person can face death with calm, because the meaning already exists. Consider a soldier who returns home with a scar. The scar hurts when touched. The soldier can hide the scar, or can share the story of how the scar reminded him to value peace. By telling the story, the soldier gives the pain a purpose. The scar becomes a symbol of a promise to work for peace. This is an example of meaning in a real-world setting. Another example is a mother who loses a child. The loss feels like an endless night. Some mothers choose to start a charity in the child's name. The charity helps other families. The mother finds a way to turn her grief into help for others. The pain does not disappear, but it gains a new shape. This shape is meaning. Both examples show how suffering can be reshaped. The reshaping is not magic. It is a decision, a small act, a promise, a love, or a work. The decision is the first step. Once the step is taken, the rest follows. Frankl's own words help keep the idea clear. He wrote, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning." The phrase is simple. It tells a listener that pain can stop feeling like pain when it is linked to a purpose. It does not say that all pain disappears. It says that the feeling changes. When the runner finally runs again, he feels the same pain in his leg, but he also feels the joy of teaching. The pain is still there, but it is no longer the whole story. The runner's story now includes the lesson he passes on. The job loser who starts a new business feels fear, but also feels hope that the new work can help others. The fear is still present, but the hope adds a new layer. In the camp, Frankl saw a man who refused to eat because he felt life had no meaning. The man died quickly. Frankl later said that the man's death showed how powerful meaning can be. Without meaning, the body gave up. With meaning, the body can survive longer. This observation formed a key part of logotherapy. Later, when Frankl's heart legacy and modern applications, Viktor Frankl's ideas have spread far beyond the walls of a concentration camp. In every corner of modern life, his call to find meaning still rings true. The earlier sections traced his early years, his time in the camps, and the birth of logotherapy. Those parts showed how he built a view of human freedom that rests on choice, even when everything else is taken away. Now the story moves to the ways that view lives on in today's therapy rooms, classrooms, and self-help books. In the field of therapy, logotherapy is now a common tool. Many clinicians blend it with other methods, but the core stays the same. Help the person see a purpose that lifts them above pain. A therapist in a busy city office often begins a session by asking a client what they value most. The question is simple, yet it opens a space where the client can name a goal, a relationship, or a cause that feels worth living for. When the client can name that, the therapist can guide them to act toward it. This approach matches the earlier description of Frankl. Will to meaning, the drive that pushes people to seek purpose when they cannot control their surroundings. A recent conference in Vienna honored Frankl's work with a full day of talks. Scholars from psychology, theology, and education gathered to share new research. One speaker presented a study that measured stress levels in patients who used meaning-focused exercises. The results showed lower cortisol, the stress hormone, compared with patients who only used standard cognitive techniques. The conference also featured a panel on how schools can use Frankl's ideas. The panelists pointed back to the section on meaning in everyday life, reminding listeners that even a small sense of purpose can change how a person reacts to hardship. The first English translation of Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, arrived in 1959. The translator, a young scholar named Thomas S. Suss, faced a tough task. He had to keep the raw feeling of the original German while making the language clear for readers who had never heard of a concentration camp. When the book hit the shelves, it quickly became a bestseller. Readers wrote letters saying the book gave them a new way to look at their own struggles. That early success set the stage for the many self-help guides that now quote Frankl's words. One of the most quoted lines from Frankl appears in many modern books. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The line is simple, but it carries the weight of a whole philosophy. It appears in a popular podcast about resilience, in a motivational poster on a college dorm wall, and in a therapist's notebook. Each time it is used, it points back to the idea that meaning can be found even in the darkest moments. In education, the idea of meaning-based learning is now part of many curricula. A high school student named Maya struggled with math. She felt the subject was just a set of numbers with no real use. After reading a short excerpt from Frankl's diary, she tried a new study tip. She asked herself why the skill mattered for her future. She wrote down that mastering algebra would help her design better bridges, something she dreamed of building. By linking the subject to a personal goal, Maya felt more engaged. Her grades rose, and she reported feeling less anxious about tests. This example shows how Frankl's call to find purpose can turn a routine task into a step toward a larger dream. Another example comes from a therapist named Dr. Patel, who works with veterans. Many of the veterans feel lost after leaving the military. Dr. Patel uses a logotherapy exercise called future-oriented reflection. The client writes a short paragraph about a future they can see themselves in, even if the present feels bleak. The therapist then helps the client break that vision into small actions, such as joining a community group or learning a new skill. Over weeks, the veteran reports feeling a new sense of direction. The therapist credits Frankl's insight that meaning can be created through future-oriented goals, not just by fixing past wounds. These stories tie back to the earlier discussion of the 3 ways to find meaning. The first way, through work, appears in Maya's math study. The second way, through love, shows up when a veteran writes about reconnecting with family. The third way, through suffering, is the core of Frankl's own story in the camps. By linking the past sections to the present examples, the script shows a clear line from theory to practice. Modern researchers also test Frankl's ideas with brain scans. A study at a university in Canada used functional MRI to watch participants as they imagined a meaningful future. The scan showed increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain linked to planning and value judgment. The researchers wrote that the brain seems to respond positively when a person feels a sense of purpose. This scientific finding echoes Frankl's claim that meaning can change how a person experiences reality. It also connects to the earlier note on the freedom to choose one's attitude, now seen as a brain process that can be trained. However, not everyone agrees that Frankl's ideas still hold the same power. One critic argues that his focus on meaning is outdated in a world that values data and measurable outcomes. The critic says that modern therapy should rely on techniques that can be counted, like the number of thoughts changed in a session, rather than on vague concepts like purpose. This view was mentioned in the earlier section on criticisms of existential therapy. The critic points out that many self-help books now use algorithms and habit-forming apps, leaving little room for the deep reflection Frankl encouraged. A second counter-argument comes from the field of neuroscience. Some scientists claim that the brain's chemistry, not abstract meaning, drives mood and behavior. They argue that medications and cognitive behavioral methods that target thought patterns are more effective than discussions about purpose. This stance appears in the part of the video that covered alternative explanations for resilience. The scientists say that when serotonin levels rise, people feel better, regardless of whether they have found a larger goal. Both criticisms have merit, but they also miss a key point. Frankl never claimed that meaning alone could replace all other tools. He saw it as one important piece of a larger puzzle. The earlier discussion of the three pillars of logotherapy emphasized that meaning works together with responsibility and freedom. Modern therapy often blends meaning-focused work with medication and cognitive strategies. In this way, Frankl's ideas complement, rather than compete with, scientific advances. The modern self-help market also reflects Frankl's influence. Best-selling books on purpose often quote his lines and use his three-step method. Identify a personal value, set a small goal, and reflect on progress. Podcasts on mental health frequently feature interviews with psychologists who use logotherapy. Even apps that track mood now include a meaning section, where users can write why a day mattered to them. These tools echo the earlier point that meaning can be practiced daily, a theme that runs through the whole series. In schools, teachers are now asked to help students see the purpose behind each lesson. A teacher in a rural school asked her class to write a short note on how learning about the water cycle could help their community. The students talked about protecting the river that supplies their town. By linking the lesson to a real need, the teacher applied Frankl's idea that meaning makes learning stick. This practice mirrors the earlier example of meaning in work, showing how the same principle can be used in different settings. The recent Vienna conference also highlighted a new project that brings Frankl's ideas to corporate training. Companies are using short workshops where employees write about a personal value that aligns with their job role. The goal is to boost motivation and reduce burnout. Early reports suggest that employees who complete the workshop feel more engaged. This corporate use ties back to the earlier note on meaning at work and shows how the concept has moved from theory to everyday business life. Another modern twist is the rise of meaning therapy groups online. These groups meet via video chat and follow a simple structure. Share a personal story, identify a lesson or purpose, and set a small action for the week. The format is based on Frankl's technique of paradoxical intention, where a person confronts a fear by imagining it in a controlled way. In the online groups, participants use that method to face anxieties about the future, turning fear into a chance to choose a new direction. This example shows how technology can carry forward an old idea. The story of the first English translation also reminds us that language matters. When the book entered the English-speaking world, it opened a path for many more translations. Today, the book is available in over 30 languages, and each new edition adds a foreword that connects Frankl's ideas to current issues, from climate change to social justice. The spread of the text shows how a single story can spark a global conversation about meaning. The recent conference also featured a young scholar who linked Frankl's ideas to climate activism. She argued that people who feel a deep sense of purpose are more likely to take action on environmental issues. Her talk cited a study where participants who wrote about a personal mission to protect nature reported higher willingness to volunteer. This ties back to the earlier discussion of meaning as a driver of action, showing that the concept still fuels new research. Even critics who say Frankl is outdated sometimes find value in his words. One neuroscientist, while questioning the meaning label, still quoted Frankl's line about choosing one's attitude. The scientist said that the quote reminds researchers that the brain can adapt when people decide to reframe a situation. This shows that even a skeptical view can borrow from Frankl's insight, linking back to the earlier theme of freedom of attitude. In the world of self-help, the phrase "search for meaning" appears on many book covers. The phrase itself comes from Frankl's title. Modern authors often add a subtitle like "A Guide for Modern Life," showing how the original idea is being updated. The subtitle usually promises practical steps, echoing Frankl's own advice to act in spite of suffering. This pattern repeats the earlier point that meaning is not just a thought but a call to do something. A final anecdote from the recent conference involved a retired nurse who attended a session on meaning in later life. She shared that after reading Frankl's work, she started a small garden to grow herbs for her neighbors. The garden gave her a daily purpose and connected her to the community. Her story mirrors the earlier example of meaning through love and service, proving that the same principle works at any age. In sum, Viktor Frankl's legacy lives on in many places. Therapists use his techniques to help clients find direction. Teachers help students link lessons to personal goals. Self-help writers and app developers embed his ideas in tools for everyday use. Even critics acknowledge that his focus on choice and attitude still speaks to modern science. The history of his book's translation and the recent conference show that the world continues to revisit his words. As the series has shown, the core message remains clear. When a person can see a purpose, even the hardest moments become bearable, and sometimes they become a stepping stone to something greater. This message, first spoken in a prison camp, now echoes in classrooms, clinics, and living rooms across the globe.